I'm Mrittunjoy, and today we have a very special guest with us. He needs no introduction. He's a lover and defender of Hindus in India and abroad. And he's none other than Francois Gautier. To give a brief introduction to Francois, Francois is an eminent journalist in his own right and has worked with Figaro, DNA and Outlook India, and has written books, various books such as The Guru of Joy, India, Self-Denial as well. He has in the past brought awareness to the idea of the Hindu Holocaust in the medieval ages and advocates for the indigenous Aryan theory as well. He has also established an NGO called the Foundation for the Advancement of Cultural Ties. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Francois. To quickly go into the questions themselves. So we were very interested in discussing various nuances of your work and your life, obviously. And I'll start from the very beginning in a manner of speaking. I mean, you have had an upper class Catholic education, and though you never really fitted into the system and revolted against it quite early, as we have shared in the past. Your family wanted you to be a businessman, but you were interested in writing. And so you wrote for a small newspaper and then for a friend for a film script, I believe. This is a fascinating life trajectory for any teenager, as you were back then. How do you see that period of your life and how it shaped you?
I was looking for answers. I was looking for, who I am, what's the meaning of life, to know myself. And it was a time when one could fly from India from France to India. It just happened that there was a caravan of cars driving from Paris to Pondicherry, south of the city of Auroville. So I thought that I didn't know anything about India. I was not interested in India or in spirituality. So I had a little bit mystic side from my childhood. So I took that caravan and I drove to Delhi, from Paris to Delhi. And in Delhi, I had a very strong experience in the Sri Aurobindo ashram, which was a very small building then, but not the big school that is now. That I had come home and it was a place of knowledge. So then from Delhi we drove to Pondicherry and I met the mother who was from the companion, she was a great yogini. And after my strong experience in Delhi, again meeting her, I Guru, life is and I had already decided that I would stay and live in India. And after meeting the mother, I stayed for 7-8 years on an ashramite in the Sri Aurobindo ashram Pondicherry. Started reading Sri Aurobindo, and then of course the mother died, and the big child from the Guha died. So I have done a little bit of journalism and photography before coming to India, and I started freelancing in the south of India first.
Yeah.
So places like Aryan or Aryan. And then slowly I came to Delhi and I became a political journalist for some of the major French-speaking newspapers and magazines. So I did for 20 years. I was a reporter and a journalist. And of course, from writing articles, I started writing books on Indian history because when I was talking Kashmir, I saw with my own eyes flash up to this region. That's me, studying Indian history. So I'm not an historian, but I started studying Indian history and I started writing books on Indian history. So that's my story in brief.
Very fascinating. I think I would like to, take the points that you mentioned about you coming to India with the first wave of Auroville migrants at the age of 19, I think back in 1969. And for you, so what makes Auroville so special according to you? And how do you see the message of Sri Aurobindo and the mother whom you yourself interacted with, as something that can guide humanity forward? I mean, especially in our country today, given the realities we face and more generally as well? I mean, how do you see that guiding us going forward? What are the key things that you take from there?
Sri Aurobindo is a giant. He's an Himalayan giant. Unfortunately, for many reasons. First, because he was one of the first to ask the British to leave India, much before Mahatma Gandhi. When he was landed in Bombay, he was educated in England and then came back to his country and landed in Bombay. So in the early 1900s, there was articles, but the Dharma of India, or the ancient civilization of India, asking the British to leave. And he was so passionate that he was ready to fight. He went to jail twice because his brother Aryan manufactured bombs in the basement of the house to kill British magistrates and army people. So Aurobindo was not a pacifist. He thought that India should become free, and in the spirit of the Bhagavad Gita, if necessary by force. So his place is not there in the history book, because he and Tilak were actually the forerunners. I mean, people say that the first mutiny of India is actually the first revolution, the first independent movement, but that's not true, because the mutiny of India was a very complicated story, and mostly it tried to put back on the throne the Mughals. So we cannot say that it was really the first independent movement, but Sri Aurobindo and Tilak were all. For me, Sri Aurobindo is a Himalaya, and he hasn't got the place he deserves, not only in Indian history books, but in philosophy. In philosophy, philosophy is taught because it's very, very often at a high level, but fortunately it is not. But for me, Sri Aurobindo remains my guru and my inspiration, and the fact that I met the mother, great privilege for me, so young. I'm very grateful to have come to Pondicherry by chance or accident that changed my life and saved my soul.
Absolutely. I think that must have been, a life-changing experience of sorts, because I myself have been to Auroville and Pondicherry, and it's a totally different ambience, a very, very distinct ambience, so to say. So that obviously brought you towards spirituality very naturally, in a manner of speaking. But your movements towards Indology as a subject, and even spirituality for that matter, and how you kept the connection between the two, how you wrote about that extensively. You wrote in your books, you have written in your books, as well as in articles in various newspapers, for instance. So your interest in Indology and spirituality, how did that come to be going forward from, let's say the Auroville days and moving forward?
So, I mean, that the ashram, the Pondicherry ashram, were very intense spiritual years. Meeting the mother, meditating. For me, the genius of India is spirituality. And when I started freelancing in the south, I discovered that the people of India, the people of the countryside, they have this spirituality in a very innate, spontaneous manner. In the West, we need to think, I have to be good, I should not kill, I should not steal. But here in India, when I started freelancing as a journalist, I discovered I was in Kerala, and I was doing a picture on the ancient martial arts of Karate from India to Japan to China. So they had in their genes, spirituality of acceptance, of tolerance, of knowing that God, manifests at different times with different names, different scriptures. The simple people of India, not the intellectuals, not even the yogis.
So you mentioned about the Indian values and ideas which have come forth, and obviously your interactions in Auroville and thereafter have shaped a lot of the thinking which brought you into Indology. And you have been a critic of some of the works of some writers such as A.L. Basham, where you took exception to his work, The Wonder That Was India, and see that and did you write the book The Wonder That Is India as a reaction against Basham's work? And what are your thoughts on that particular book by Basham?
A gentleman called Sitaram Goel, and in those days I used to write in Hinduism Times and in Bombay paper called Blit. So Mr. Sitaram Goel, who has a publishing house called The Voice of India, contacted me by letter and asked me if I was willing to have a collection of my articles published. And I replied to him that I would rather write a book from scratch. So this is what I did. I wrote The Wonder That Is India as an opposition to a bestseller by a guy called Mr. Basham, who was an Australian, who had written a book, Wonder That Was India. Which was a good book, but a little bit, India. I'm very grateful to Mr. Sitaram Goel because he's the one who's on the path of writing books in English. But the first one was important to me, and I owe it to Sitaram Goel, who was a pioneer of the Hindus at the time.
Right. Very important point there. So I was wondering, I mean, you have mentioned in the past that the foundations of Indian society were unique since all the aspects of life were turned towards the spiritual. And you have gone on to mention about the four varnas and how they corresponded to the inner capacities of the individual. And so do you think that this was more of a spiritual rather than a social segregation per se, as I've written about as well in the past? And do you see a need to incorporate these ideas and elements from these foundations of ancient Indian society in the modern times?
Yes. I was traveling yesterday from the Himalayas back to Delhi, and I'm looking at the architecture, looking at what has been since 1947, except for a few exceptions. It's a bad copy of what was done in the West in the 50s or the 60s. If you look at Indian modern painting, again, there might be some talent, but it's just a copy of what is done in the West. If you look at everything in India, if you look at literature, the literature that work, that sells in the West is mostly written by people who are anglicized, like Bipin or Salman Rushdie, or all these people, they write in English, for a Western mind. So it seems to me that India has gone the wrong way. Even education today, they only produce clones. The education that is happening in India just makes clones which are good for export. So the spirituality, which is the very foundation of Indian culture, of Indian life, of Indian everything, even Indian politics. If you look at Indian politics in the past, there was the kings had, or the emperors, as a sense of dharma, of duty towards the people. Now, I think Mr. Modi does embody that, but it is a rivalry. Most of the politicians in India, even from the BJP, are the best working for the party, are the worst working for themselves, but not for the people who have elected them. Everything that remains to be done in India, everything. That all the rest is so westernized. Education, the political system is nothing. You have a president and a vice president who have no power at all, but cost tremendous amount in terms of manpower, and money, and then you have a system where anybody can be elected if you have 2 crores of rupees, and you can offer radios or computers to people. The whole thing has gone wrong. I think Auroville spoke before dying in 1950s for that all that he had worked for, and all his efforts, were going in the wrong direction. So of course, Mr. has come and there is some correction, but that's a huge work that sometimes I feel it's hopeless.
Right. Very important. Extremely, insightful point, I would say, because there are these ideas and things which are evolving in the modern age as well, and it's not quite in line with what we have possibly been in the past, in terms of orientation.
You have also spoken about the misrepresentation of Indian history, about the skewed projection of history in our textbooks and by various modern historians. You have previously said that the whole Indian history, as we read it and study it today, is a huge scam. Ashoka was a butcher who was made a hero by Nehru because he was a Buddhist, while Akbar was no better than Aurangzeb and Alexander was beaten out of India, and yet heroes like Shivaji Maharaj and Maharana Pratap are hardly mentioned. What are your thoughts on this?
We spoke about only Akbar and Ashoka, which are emblems, that Nehru popped up for good and bad reasons, but there are so many kings and queens, unknown of who were stolen people. Shivaji Maharaj, for instance, is known in Maharashtra, but not so well known in the south. For instance, is on par with Napoleon, or on par with the greatest warrior ever. And he was more than a warrior. He was an administrator. He was a man of extraordinary courage and wit, and intelligence. But he doesn't have the place that he deserves. Maharana Pratap was the only Rajput who actually fought the Mughals. All the other Mughals, the total Maharajas, which fascinates so much Westerners. So for Maharana Pratap and Shivaji Maharaj, they were invaders, they were foreigners. So Maharana Pratap is the only Rajput who actually fought the Mughal, and he fought Akbar. Akbar desperately wanted to be friends with him and kept sending him letters and embassies. But Maharana Pratap considered him as a foreigner, as an invader. And he had killed 30,000 Hindus in Chittor. There was a huge sati also, because the women and daughters didn't want to be raped by the soldiers of Akbar. So Maharana Pratap fought him as a sati and held him down. Never lived in the palace. It was very, very fair. He lived in his army. He was very secular. I was very sure of Maharaj. In the true secular sense, they were Hindus.
Yeah.
But they would harm or kill the daughters of their enemies or the wives of their enemies. But they were true Hindus. So, if you say Maharana Pratap in the south of India, nobody knows who he is. And yet, he was an extraordinary man. So, we know the Rani of Jhansi, but there were so many others. There was Tarabai, there was Rani Kitushkanama. There were so many unknown queens of India. Now in history books, it's just Akbar and Ashoka. And if you actually do research on Ashoka, he did not become a Buddhist because he wanted to shun violence. He became a Buddhist for political reasons, because in those days there was Jain and Buddhism, and there was a conflict. There was a huge conflict between them. So to counter, one of the sects of Jainism, for which he was extremely cruel. Ashoka was an extremely cruel man after he converted to Buddhism. So, the whole history is not written as it happened, and there is some changes now with the Modi government, but to rename a road, to rename Aurangzeb Road by Abdul Kalam Road is good, but it's just a very, very tiny symbolic gesture. We need to stand history. So this is what I've tried to do in my museum, but it's a very difficult task because Indians still have a very Nehruvian mindset. Most Hindus, the majority of Hindus, they might go to the temple or they might, but they remain, ignorant about their own history.
Yeah.
They remain shy. They remain, and they don't challenge. They're not challenging those who attack them. They're not challenging those who want to kill them or want to take over the temple. So it's a difficult story.
Extremely important point, I think, in terms of the balance and how we go about with engagement in general in today's society. You also have spoken about the partition. So, in a Western journalist of India, the Ferris columns, you are critical of the partition in 1947, and you go on to say, and I quote, "As long as Pakistan and India are divided, there will be other Kashmirs, other Ayodhyas, other wars with Pakistan, nuclear maybe, and India will never be at peace with its own Muslim community, which is a common danger to herself," as you say, unquote, "and I have advocated for Indian-Pakistan reunification." So given current geopolitical realities, how do you see a closer working relation, if not a reunification of the two nations?
There was a chance that India not be divided at independence. And there was a guy called Stafford Cripps who Churchill assigned because as the Second World War, Churchill needed India for not only for manpower but also for food and for so many things. So he sent a guy called Stafford Cripps who offered Gandhi and Nehru that if you collaborate with the war effort, we will give you the Commonwealth status which Australia and other countries had, which would have meant that India wouldn't have been divided, though there was already a movement, for Pakistan. There were already movement for Pakistan. Jinnah was there, but Aurobindo actually sent someone to Delhi who said that yes, we need to accept this proposal because it will avoid bloodshed in 1947, and this is what happened. In 1947, the bloodshed was enormous. The Muslims killed an enormous amount of Hindus, and of course the Sikhs were a warrior race, were created to protect the Hindus. They finally retaliated, but again, it is not said openly in books. It is not said that the massacres were started by the Muslims, whether it was in Calcutta, whether it was before that, the Moplas, the revival of the Caliphate, or whether it was in Pakistan, the Hindus were massacred. So, Indian history is not written as that. Now, Aurobindo said at that time, as long as Pakistan and India are divided, there will be strife, there will be Kashmir, there will be problem. And it's true, but things have changed also. I think that the Kashmir problem cannot be solved. It is true that unless Pakistan and India come to an agreement, the Kashmir problem will not go away. But things have become more complicated now because the Americans are going to withdraw from Afghanistan. It is going to again leave a gap for the Taliban to take over. Taliban takes over, it will be supported by Pakistan, and again they will try to create strife not only in Kashmir but also possibly in Punjab. So it's very complicated. The only positive element is that there is a karma. Pakistan has exported so much terror, not only towards India but towards the rest of the world, that it's coming back to themselves. So there is a possibility that Pakistan will internally slowly disintegrate, and that South Asia, the Commonwealth of South Asia, or a European Union of South Asia, which is something which ideally should happen, with no borders, a common monetary system.
Yeah.
It may happen. But now there's a Chinese element which has come on top of that, which is, to my mind, much more dangerous than Pakistan, because the Chinese are more numerous, more ruthless, they're better armed, they have lots of money. So I think Pakistan for the moment is not India's main problem. India's main problem is China at the moment.
Yes, at the moment it's with China primarily, yeah. With recent, the standoff and all. We also share our interest in the decentralization of the economy of India, and I think nation of social, political, and educational systems. Even in your case, even at the cost of democratic principles and the constitution, I believe in one of the pieces. What do you see are the major roadblocks on that part, and how could we resolve them, according to you?
The problem is Delhi. The problem is that the capital of India is in Delhi. It's made for the British because Delhi controlled the invasions all came from the Hindu Kush, Afghanistan to Pakistan to Delhi. So the British shifted the capital to Delhi because from a military point of view, they could control invasion. They could control invasions towards India. Now, Delhi has become a big bubble. A big bubble where you take a politician from Tamil Nadu, for instance, who may be good-willing, be sincere. He comes to Delhi, he gets a bungalow, in the heart of Delhi, and he gets a car, a driver, he gets so many people, servants. Then he goes into that parliament, which is like a fish market, where there's no air, there is no natural air, there is no natural light. And then he loses sight of why he's been elected. And Mr. Modi himself, since he came to Delhi, he's surrounded by 7 rings of security, 8 rings of bureaucrats, he's lost contact with India. I'm sorry to say, but he's lost contact with India, which he had when he was in Gujarat, because Gujarat is in the center of India. He met people, there was not so much security. He met people, so he had an ear to the ground, which he doesn't have anymore. He has to depend on other people to have an ear to the ground. So unless the capital is shifted away from Delhi to a more central place, you have a system where it's a huge bubble. The diplomats, the journalists, the intellectuals, the politicians, they all live together happily in luxury.
Yeah.
And they have no clue what the rest of India needs. And the second thing is that India is governed by bureaucrats. This morning, I met Mrs. Nirmala Sitaraman, the finance minister. She's a wonderful woman, very sincere, true Hindu. But she herself is a prisoner of a bureaucrat. Mr. Modi makes very good decisions, but he needs the bureaucrats to implement them. And by the time from Delhi they come down, to Gujarat or to Orissa or to Tamil Nadu or to Andhra Pradesh, they are diluted.
Yeah.
The bureaucrats make their own rules.
Right.
I'll give you an example. Now we're coming back from the Himalayas. We have to fly to Chennai on Sunday, so we need a COVID test. Now the government says that anybody can have a COVID test, but actually you need to bribe a doctor to get a prescription so that you have a COVID test. So the whole system has become perverted because some district magistrate or some bureaucrat has said that unless you have a certificate, you cannot have a COVID test. Someone made I don't think Mr. Modi made the rule. Some bureaucrat made the rule. So then it opens the door to corruption. India is a place of huge corruption, but it's not that people are corrupt. It's a system that creates corruption. But how will Mr. Modi know? Who's going to tell Mr. Modi that if you want to have a COVID test today, you need to bribe a doctor to have this prescription? Maybe I will tell him.
Right. Right. Very, very interesting there. Right. So going on to the next, major topics that I think we discussed previously, and I think I've read some of your works on this. You have openly said that Hinduism is under threat from 4 different sources: Christianity, Islam, Marxism, and Westernization. And you have also spoken up against what you see as a Buddhist Jain tradition of ahimsa. What do you feel is a way to stand up against these threats that you speak about, that Hinduism faces? Fundamentally, how must this inclusivist Dharmic tradition oppose the exclusivist tendencies and traditions out in the contemporary world today? Because, as I say, that we may embrace them, but they probably won't, right? So how do you see this predicament? How do we kind of tackle this?
Hindus are facing today are multiple. As you said, the Christian missionary research, as we speak. Of course, there is also Indian Muslims who go to the Gulf countries and come back more radicalized. I've seen that Islam in India has become much more radicalized as it used to be when I first arrived. Mostly because Indian Muslims go to the Gulf countries and come back, much more strict, make their wives wear burqas, use money to build more and more mosques, and feel that they're first Muslim before being Indian. So this is a second threat. But it's not the only one. There's also the fact that Westernization is fast catching up in India through television, cable, very fast. Westernization is probably the greatest danger that India is facing at the moment. When Sonia Gandhi was it increased more. Maybe not, she didn't consciously wish this, but she just increased more that the solution to India's problem is Westernization. And this is the problem with most Indologists in the West, is that they think that they're superior civilization and that India needs the West to become a civilized country. I mean, the Indian media looks at India through Western eyes. They don't look at India with Indian eyes. They look at India through Western eyes, through what Amnesty International thinks, or PETA thinks, or some senator thinks. So, what is Indianness? What is Indian? I'm a Westerner who thinks that Indianness is great, it's essential, but most Indians lost their Indianness, and the schooling system education system doesn't impart any Indianness, and the politics of India is just a copy of the democracy in the West, and a bad copy on top of that. It's a bad copy.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting because recently you may have heard about the statement about how certain other religions, like not Hindus but Muslims and Christians, buried in the land of India are better claimants to the heritage of India, whereas Hindus who are burnt and the ashes are spread into the seas don't quite hold that kind of claim as such. So it's a very interesting thing that came up recently. So your comments on this are interesting in that context as well. So coming to the next question, I think the Hindu Holocaust, which we speak about over centuries, is a reality. I've written about this, and I've read your works as well on this. Given the scale and number of years that this Holocaust took place, it stands unmatched in the levels of barbarism and casualties in human history. Much like colonialism is seldom shown in contemporary Britain today, the description of this Holocaust is often watered down in modern India by various historians. How do you see us moving away from this tradition of obfuscation of truth and yet not being absurdly revisionist? I mean, that's a question that is obviously very important in this context.
I started studying Indian history. Of course, I came upon Aurangzeb, because Aurangzeb is a venerated man by most historians. He's portrayed as a very stern but very just emperor. I think Aurangzeb was a monster. He was a monster not only to Hindus, but even to his own family. He imprisoned his father and he hated his brother Darashiko, who was a Sufi. He imprisoned his son, so he was an absolute monster. Now, we did an exhibition on Aurangzeb according to his own records, because his records, he was a very meticulous emperor, and every order he gave, he signed it. He had his emperor seal on them, and they're still preserved. Whenever he ordered a temple raised, or whenever he ordered Hindus to pay the tax, or Hindus to ride a horse or a palanquin, he had orders. So these orders are still preserved. So I did an exhibition on Aurangzeb, which is now in the museum. But when I showed it in Delhi, many people said, "Why do you want to wake up the past?" And the same was true of Kashmiri Pandits. I showed the Kashmiri Pandits exhibition in London because I witnessed the orders of the Pandits that were there. And many people came to me and said, "Why do you want to wake up the past? Why do you want to wake up to rise the hope of the Dharmic?" So Indians are not willing to look at their past. The Holocaust that is not only Aurangzeb, I mean, Timur killed 100,000 Hindus in one day. The pyramid of 100,000 skulls of Hindus. So Indians don't want to look at it. I'm not even sure that the BJP government wants to look at it either. But no nation can move forward unless they look at their own history, the good and the bad. And there's a lot of good in Indian history. There are a lot of good things to say. But the Hindu Holocaust is the greatest in the world ever, for sure. Calculation have been made to say 100 million Hindus died from the Hindu coup till today. I mean, even if it is 80 million, it is the greatest Holocaust ever. The burning of Nanda, the raising of Delhi several times, these are historical facts which need to be put in books, but nobody is willing to. I have seen 3 education ministers, 3 HR, what's called HRD in India ministers. None of them, had the guts to touch them. I mean, the one that's there was Murli Manohar Joshi, and there was such an outcry that he had to back out. That was 20 years ago. Now, so it's up to Hindus, because there's a billion Hindus worldwide. But Hindus unite. There are 1 billion in this planet. Every 6th person is a Hindu. Right. They can do it, but only themselves can do it, not the politicians. I don't think the politicians have either the will or the courage to do it.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, and so I mean, you have also criticized the the Indo-Aryan theory and promoted the indigenous Aryan theory as well. And so, what do you think are the strongest evidences, so to say, for promulgating the indigenous Aryan theory over the Indo-Aryan theory, so to say?
It's gone that story. There have been so many genetic, even later genetic discoveries have shown that most South Asian, most Indians have the same genetic genome. They have the same genome. That means that there was no alien invasion. There was no white people that came and pushed back the tribals and the darker people, to the center, to the south. It's long been disproved, this theory. And even historians like Romila Tapa and Yafan Habib have taken a step back. They say, oh, maybe it was not an invasion, maybe it was just a peaceful migration, but we know it never happened, but it's still in history books. Unfortunately, it's still very much in all your history books, it's foundation of the history. So unless the government, has courage to, we have scientific that the alien invasion. But on the contrary, what is called the Aryans, the Hindus, want the world peacefully. They want towards, Bali and even the Philippines and peacefully, and the Cholas Empire and the Cheras Empire, they peacefully, their cultures peacefully went eastward. And the same way, the Indic culture peacefully went towards, Iran and Greece prior to Muhammad. All these prior to Muhammad, they went peacefully. Even the Sikh culture has some Vedic elements in it. So it's very well known. The only thing is that it's not been officially stamped, officially removed from history books, but it's an old story.
Moving slightly away from the Dharmic traditions here for this question, and looking at what you have written about Jesus Christ in the past, and highlighted how he was influenced by Hindu and Buddhist esotericism. My question is, where did this part of, and I'm sorry, you also mentioned that he came to India, which is something which various people have written about as well, others. So where did this part of history, if true, get lost? And does this mean, more importantly, that we can reclaim what can be called a certain dharmic element to what is Christianity today, essentially?
Yeah, certainly. Certainly, I think the Bhagavad Gita become the Bible of the world, because the truth is of what we are, what happens when you die, what happens when you reborn, why you reborn, what is an avatar, what is karma. These are truths that the world has lost, and India somehow preserved. In fact, everything is there. Everything is said. It becomes, as I said, it becomes the Bible of the world, the Dharma of the world. So that sense of, why am I on this earth? And especially now with the coronavirus, with the COVID, people are asking questions to themselves. And every answer is in the Bhagavad Gita. Sri Aurobindo said that the 21st century will be out of the unexpected, and this is what happened with the COVID. COVID is, it's like reshuffling the pack of cards, and we don't know what's going to come out of it, because it's going to last quite a few years, and it's painful for many, difficult. I find it very difficult to function in this world, to take a flight, to go in the market, to everything is changing, but certainly in a dharmic way, certainly it will be something which is dharmic in the end. It's something that will improve the world. So yes, dharma is a concept, Indian concept, that the world needs to understand and to practice.
So communist China, obviously, and China in general, has had a history of brutish assertion since early days of its existence. Tibet's annexation was a gross violation of propriety and standards of international affairs. And we have recently seen that they have again moved against India, for instance, and India and China have recently had a standoff. In light of these developments, what do you see as the larger international geopolitical reality when it comes to China, and how best can India face it?
Start with the economic angle. The West has invested hugely in China. Hugely. Every major company in the West, from Nike to Coca-Cola to Apple, has invested in China. Now, the coronavirus has raised some questions. The first question, of course, about the virus, how it escaped from China, how China kept quiet about it, And the second question is, that has been raised by the Canada, is that countries have realized how dependent they were on China. For instance, in my country, 95% of antibiotics are made in China. And so when the crisis happened, there was a shortage of antibiotics. Every computer today is made in China. There's no laptop that is not made in China. So countries, because of the COVID-19, have woken up to the fact that one, China is a very inscrutable place. And, of course, since then, we've seen how they've acted tough, with India, with Hong Kong, with Taiwan, in the China Sea. But also the fact that economically, the West has put all their chips on China. So now, for a long time, I've been saying that, at some point, the West will have to take back some of these chips and put them in India, which is a natural economic solution for the West, because in India, people talk English, they're friendly to the West, they integrate well, they're not, tough and suitable like the Chinese. So these have started, that economics have started. But from the political point of view, it's more complicated because China is doing a new Silk Road through the Himalayas because it wants to pour its goods in the West. So, that famous route that goes through Pakistan, Kashmir, and goes to Guha, is something that the West is also taking notice of, that the Chinese have a search for domination, for hegemony. So before that, the West didn't realize it, but now they're realizing. And the only country that can counter China, not only economically but geopolitically, is India. So far, only the US is realizing that there is no other country that can contain China from a military point of view, also economic money. But India, because India is huge, it's got a huge army, and it's got 4,300 kilometers border with China. Now, China is also trying to control the seas. It's very important, the Spratly Island, because they want to control the entire traffic that goes from the China Sea to the Indian Ocean and beyond. And this is frightening mostly the US, because Europe is. I think India is going to play a very important role in the next few years, economically, because some of the Western nations will want to shift, delocalize some of their manufacturing from China, particularly medicine, for instance. Politically, because India is the only country that can come to China. Now, there is one element that nobody speaks about, is Tibet.
Right.
Most of the border between India and China, 3,400 kilometers, is Tibet. Now, unfortunately, again, Mr. Nehru allowed the Chinese, recognized the Chinese the right over Tibet, but unless India starts, propping up the Dalai Lama with 85 now, and as soon as he dies, the Chinese are going to nominate their own Dalai Lama, unless, India starts using the Tibet card, like the Chinese are using the Aryan self-pradesh, we don't recognize Kashmir, we give Tibet with us to Kashmir. So, again, Hindus are shy, even Mr. Modi is shy to say, okay, you want to play that game with us? We have the Dalai Lama, we're going to tell that Tibet is a disputed country. Tibet has always been the peaceful buffer between the two giants, China and India. It was pro-Indian, it was Buddhist, even the Dalai Lama today is grateful to India. So why not provoke up Tibet?
The last question. So this question is on the conversion mafia, right? And the whole idea and reality that operates in many parts of India today, where we have forced masses, which are forced masses to convert, sometimes by enticement, sometimes by force, and other times by misprojection. So this is something which I recently kind of found out, and people have been sharing about this, where they have things like the presentation of a Yesu Namaskar, right, where it's a misprojection of sorts. How do you see this all too evident reality of India today, and especially for the interests of Hindus? How can we stand up against this kind of perverse manner of conversion?
government who should bring anti-conversion laws, and clamp down on, but it's not doing that. People are poor, and if you give them free education or free loans, or free medical, people are poor in India, so they will convert, out of it's an illegal and unethical conversion, but you cannot blame the people. It's not doing it. The Hindu temples are under government control, but the churches and the mosques are freedom. So unless the government steps in, but again, I don't think it will, because I don't think it has the willpower to do it.
Yes. Thank you so much, and it was lovely having you today, Francois. And we really learned a lot on a lot of things. So thank you all for joining in today. We had a wonderful interaction and interview. Thank you. Thank you so much.